I genuinely think that's a stupid argument, though. Because water can't be wet. Water can't be wet. That's like saying hair is hairy, bro. Because water. Sorry, I saw a random reel earlier that was talking about a dumb argument between friends, which is determining if water was wet. And this has been an ongoing thing that keeps popping up in my life every, I don't know, however many months. After a month, or a couple months, or a year, someone will just randomly say, water's not wet. And then I'm like, I agree with that side. I don't agree that water is wet. Because water itself is just a conglomerate of a bunch of water particles, right? Whatever makes something wet is water going into that. Say if my shirt is wet, that's because there's water particles in my shirt that's making it feel damp or wet, right? Water can't go into itself. Water can't make itself wet because water already is like water particles. You can't add water particles to water because it's already water. So if I were to add water particles to my skin is wet because there's water particles on it. Water is not wet because water is already one giant water particle thing. That you can't put water on water and for it to not be water. You put water on a shirt, that's water and shirt. That's what makes the shirt wet. You put water on skin, that's water and skin. That's what makes the skin wet. You put water on a desk, that's water and desk. That's what makes the desk wet. Even though it doesn't go into the desk, it's still on the desk because the desk is wet. Water on water doesn't mean water's wet. Hair on hair. If there's hair on my face, that doesn't mean that my hair is hairy. Hair can't be hairy. It's either my face is hairy or my face is smooth because there's no hair. If there's hair on my head is hairy. If there's hair on my arms are hairy. If there's hair on hair, that doesn't make hair hairy. It's just hair. That's, I don't know. Stupid argument. Anyway, welcome to today's episode of the Living Proof Podcast. Today, I am not talking about water being wet. I am talking about judgment and God being a just God. God is not unjust. He physically cannot be unjust. And this came to mind because I was reading today, as I do, in Psalm 94, and it was talking about how God is a just God and the wicked will not go unpunished. So I'm going to read for you here, Psalm 94, verses 1 through 11. O Lord, the God of vengeance, O God of vengeance, let your glorious justice shine forth. Arise, O judge of the earth. Give the proud what they deserve. How long, O Lord? How long will the wicked be allowed to gloat? How long will they speak with arrogance? How long will these evil people boast? They crush your people, Lord, hurting those you claim as your own. They kill widows and foreigners and murder orphans. The Lord isn't looking, they say. And besides, the God of Israel doesn't care. Think again, you fools. When will you finally catch on? Is he deaf, the one who made your ears? Is he blind, the one who formed your eyes? He punishes the nations. Won't he also punish you? He knows everything. Doesn't he also know what you are doing? The Lord knows people's thoughts. He knows they are worthless. And I think those last couple lines, those are bars, bruh. The one who made your ears, is he deaf? And the one who formed your eyes, is he blind? God made your eyes and God made your ears. Of course he's going to hear everything you say. And of course he's going to know everything you do and witness everything you see. He created the ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to speak. So why would he not know everything you're going to do? I already talked about how God's all-knowing, omniscient. Yes, omniscient. He's all-knowing. And God knows everything. Then God knows you're going to be wicked. And God knows your heart, right? God knows what you feel deep down in your heart. So if you follow the Lord with your heart, you're going to make wise decisions and you're going to try and stick to God's laws as opposed to sticking to the world's laws. You stick to the world's laws and say, oh, God doesn't care. It's not like he's here. God is here. God sees and God knows. God will see you and God knows what you're doing and he will judge you accordingly. That's pretty much what this passage is talking about. And I think it resonates with me personally because there is a saying that my father always used to say. He would say, do the right thing even when you don't feel like it, especially when nobody's watching. Because it's so easy to do the wrong thing when you feel like nobody else is watching you. And, it's human nature. It's not like any one person's fault. If you're not being watched, that you tend to do things that you wouldn't do in the presence of other people. That's just how it goes, right? So if I'm by myself and I get tempted, it's much easier to give into that temptation by yourself than to give into that temptation when you're with a group of people. A simple example of that is watching pornography, right? I know everybody that does that would rather do that in private then do it in public, right? You're not going to go to your friends and say, look at this cool video, and then just show them, like, So that temptation only comes to you. It comes to you while you're in public, I'm sure, but you're not going to give into that because fear of being judged by other people, right? So that same temptation comes when you're alone. You see nobody else around, you're going to be like, okay, I'll give in. Nobody's around. But there's always someone around. There's always someone watching. Same person that gave you the ability to see and hear, to feel the judgment around you, is the same person that is watching you as you commit those acts of unrighteousness. So it's just a good thing to always keep God in mind. Always keep God at the forefront of your mind, because he is there. Whether you see him or feel him or not, he is there. He is watching, and he is watching over you. And he will judge you accordingly based on your actions. So to say that someone is not watching you, that you can do whatever you want because no one's holding you accountable, is not true. And that's why 2 episodes ago I talked about accountability, because you need to hold yourself accountable even when you feel like God is not there. And you need to be faithful to God, last episode, even when God is not there. Because it just ties into how you hold yourself when you respect God, when you love God, when you cherish his laws and cherish his authority, right? If I trust my Father's saying, if I trust in my Father's knowledge, I'm going to practice what he preaches even when he's not around. I'm not just going to do it when he's there because it pleases him and he's going to judge me if I don't do it. Like, that's not how it should work. I love my dad, love him to death. And so the things he says to me, I'm going to take it to heart and I'm going to try and apply it. Now, there are some things we disagree with. Yes. Same thing with God. There are some things we disagree with God. I know I don't agree with every single thing at the time. In the future, I do. Like, I look back on things that I normally would have probably questioned, and seeing how God delivered me from certain situations, from certain temptations, seeing why his laws were that way, I can agree with them now. But in the moment, if God's calling me in a season of isolation and I want to be hanging out with people and I want to try and get into a relationship, I'm going to be like, God, that doesn't make any sense for me right now. I'm not going to live by that. I'm going to try and do my own thing. And that's, holding yourself to a different standard and not trusting in God's plan, not being faithful to him. So when you encourage that thought process, when you encourage that, you're invoking God's judgment on yourself, because you're like, okay, I don't really trust what you're saying right now. I'm going to do my own plan. And then when you know that he's watching, you're going to be like, okay, God, I'm sorry. Please take me back. I'm going to follow your plan, because you're in fear of your judgment, But you should do it just because you love him, because you trust him. Act according to God's standards because you love him, because you trust him. And then you won't have to fear his judgment, even though you should fear God, yeah, but fear-mongering is not the reason you should be in a relationship with God in the first place, or any relationship for that matter. If your spouse or friend fear-mongers you into that relationship, leave, please. It's not good at all. But that's just a saying. Another thing, the truth always comes out. So that's another thing my dad always tells me. The truth always comes out. Well, no matter how big or small your lie is, the truth will most likely come out in some way, shape, or form. Whether you realize it or not, you will eventually tell someone the truth, or the truth will find a way out. And I find that to be very, very, very true. Many times I have lied, and many times it has been not successful. Many times it's been successful for an extended period of time, but then eventually it comes to fruition, So a good example is social media. The irony, I know. Wasn't supposed to have it. And my dad found out multiple times that I thought I was, quote unquote, getting away with it. I never knew how he found out. Sometimes it was me being stupid. Other times I gave no tells as far as I'm concerned, and he still found out. So I don't really know how he found out every single time. But every time he would find out that I was going behind his back and doing something that was disrespectful to him. Now he doesn't care. Like, I'm an adult. It doesn't really matter. But before I realized that every time I lied about it, it was not going to end up well. And you don't feel good about it if you keep something hidden, trying to protect yourself from judgment, right? If I'm telling a lie every single day, if you feel good about that, you need to get your heart checked out, because that should not make you feel good. If I'm directly lying to someone every single day saying, oh yeah, no, not me. I'm not the one doing that sin. No, sir. That's not me. That's guy over there. Got to check him out. Like, it doesn't make me feel good. It never made me feel good, because I was holding something from him that, always made me tense. Always made our relationship, a little bit strained, a little bit tense. And that's how it shouldn't be with God. You shouldn't do that with God. You shouldn't lie to God and trying to hold things from him so you don't get judged, because then your relationship is going to be tense. It's going to be one of stress, one of, lying, one of fear, one of anxiety, because you're always going to be worrying about, oh, when's God going to give me judgment? Oh, when's God going to do this? Like, just be honest and come to him and tell him the truth. Is he going to give you judgment? Yeah. But he's also going to understand that you're coming to him in submission. You're coming to him in confession. And he's going to be like, okay, I understand. I know you. I've known you since birth. I've known you before birth. I created you. I understand what you're going through. And I'm here for you as a resource, as a rock, as a guide, even though judgment will still come. And that's why you try your best to live by his standards, so that, judgment will come, but you're pleasing him and you're living for him, which saves you from eternal judgment, in a sense. I'm lost my train of thought. Hold on. Okay. So I think a good examples of justice is definitely in the Old Testament. There's a lot of justice in the Old Testament, specifically, like, not even specifically, just throughout the entire Old Testament, there's examples of God being just and God judging either his people or the people around his people because of the actions they did. So I was reading from a website, Peace Theology, and there's an author, Ted Grimsrud. Man, I don't know why I couldn't say that. But Ted Grimsrud, Ted Grimsrud wrote that God's justice in the Old Testament centers not primarily on retribution, but on salvation. God's justice does not punish so much as correct. The justice of God saves, manifesting God's fidelity to the role as the Lord of the covenant. God created the earth and its inhabitants for harmonious relationships. So, a lot of people see God's justice, they only see it as, something to punish. God does this, God punishes his people, God kills a bunch of the Israelites when they're at the foot of Mount Sinai because they're worshiping the golden calf. God, doesn't let his people enter the promised land because he's a cruel God. He's mean. That's not what is going on. If you read into it deeper, God gives instruction. They fail to follow that instruction. God then has to correct them through some means of punishment, which, I put punishment in air quotes because it's not really punishment. God's correcting them via setting an example, If my father, if I disobey him, and he, takes my phone away, right? It's not so much punishment as a method of correction. Because, yeah, it's a punishment. Yeah, I'm not going to have my phone. But if you look into it deeper, he's not taking my phone because he hates me, right? He's not taking my phone because he's mad. Well, he's mad. He's not taking my phone because he's angry with me as a person and he hates me and he wants me to die. No, he's taking my phone because he wants me to learn my lesson and to correct myself so I don't do it again in the future. Not because I fear what he's going to do, but because I understand and respect him, and I should, because he's my parent, right? The Israelites, they did not understand and respect God as a parent, as a guide, as a leader, and so they went and did their own thing, and then when they received punishment, they were afraid and turned back to God. But then it was a cycle of going back to lust and temptation, going back to God, going back to perverse ways, going back to God, going back to not trusting him, going back. It's like back and forth, back and forth. They were never consistent with God because they only focused on the punishment, which is really meant for correction, rather than the actual act of loving God and knowing God and coming to, understand him and their relationship with him. So I think that goes to show that God's punishment or God's judgment is not really punishment. It's correction, but it just depends on how you perceive it and how you see it. Perspective is definitely key in a lot of God's teachings. In many of his parables in the New Testament, Jesus talks to rulers, he talks to the Pharisees, he talks to Gentiles, he talks to Jews, he talks to everybody, right? But he doesn't always speak directly. He speaks in metaphors, he speaks in parables, he speaks in, not cryptic, but, messages that aren't easily deciphered. You have to think about it. You have to ponder, chew on it a little bit, right? So God is not just going to, I completely lost my train of thought. Hold on. God doesn't teach us directly. God gives us messages that we have to think about, that we have to chew on a little bit. And so it's the same thing kind of with this judgment, right? He's going to judge us in a way that doesn't have just face value. If you take Jesus' parables at face value, right? You're going to be like, that makes zero sense, dude. We're talking about laws and we're talking about riches. Why are you talking about lambs and sheep and shepherds? What are we doing? But if you look a little bit deeper, you're going to see, okay, maybe he's trying to tell me something with this and relate my position to that of a sheep, or my position to that of a lamb. You know what I mean? So taking God's judgment, seeing it at face value, oh yeah, God just wants to punish them because he hates them. Oh my gosh, he hates the people. I'm going to tell everybody that God is a cruel God because he just kills people, blah, blah, blah. But if you look deeper, we see that God does that for a reason. He does that to correct the Israelites. He does that to show them that he is all powerful and he is one to be feared, one to be worshiped. Feared not as in, oh my gosh, he's going to destroy me. Feared as in, God is going to destroy me. He's that great. I should worship him because he's that great. Not a sad fear, a fear like awe. I'm in awe. I'm amazed at the power of God kind of thing. So, yeah, God's judgment is not direct punishment, but it can be seen as punishment, but it's more correction. A couple examples of God's judgment in the Old Testament. First one, pretty obvious, Adam and Eve in the garden. God tells them, you can eat of any fruit in the garden, except that one tree in the middle. And you know what they do? I mean, yeah, they were tempted, but they eat the one tree in the middle, right? So God then says in Genesis 3:16-19, then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow you will... Wait, where's the other part? Okay, hold on. By the sweat of your brow... Give me a second. I lost my thing. I think I missed a line, but by the sweat of your brow, you have to work for the food you eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. So God pretty much said, woman, they'll have painful childbirth. They'll always want to control their husband. And then the man is going to be like working for the rest of his life. So God wasn't trying to literally punish them because he hates them. He's trying to make an example saying that, there are consequences for your actions. And that's pretty much every single example I have here. Everything that God is trying to show. There are consequences for your actions. And if you live like there is nothing bad that could ever happen to you, then you're going to face some serious judgment, man. And it's not going to be pretty. I guarantee you right now, it's not going to be pretty. Because so many people nowadays live, especially nowadays, they're like, oh, you're in your college. This is the best years of your life, man. No punishments, no worries, just live. Yeah, focus on your academics, but live a little. You get the college experience. Like, the college experience is gonna lead you to hell. I'm not gonna lie to you. The college experience is gonna lead you down a bad path, and you do not want to take it. Because college experience is living like there is nothing that really matters. Sure, you can focus on yourself and get girls and get money and improve yourself and become the best man you can be, whatever. I don't care. But the point is that you're not living for the right reason. You are living down a path that will lead you to hell. And that's not my words. That is in the Bible. If you put those things first, you will lead yourself to hell. And it is deceitful. People tell you so many things that you should focus on your job, focus on money, focus on wealth, try to be successful. And yeah, you should do those things, but not because of yourself, not because you want to be rich. Because God gives you the ability, he gives you the talent to work hard. So you work hard to bring him glory. That's why. Intent is important, but it's not as important as the relationship you have with God as a whole, right? If I focus on getting money for God's glory, but forget to foster my relationship with God, then I'm just doing it for like a stigma in my mind that, oh yeah, God will be glorified if I make the most money in the world and then do nothing with it. Like, you gotta give back to him in some way, foster that relationship in some way, So anyway, what I was saying, consequences for your actions, right? If you live like that, there will be consequences, whether you like it or not. Some people don't really care, and I don't know why, but up to them. Another example of God's judgment in the Old Testament is the Israelites wandering the wilderness. I was reading, obviously this is in Exodus, but I was reading Psalm 95, and it was also referenced, verses 8-11. The Lord says, don't harden your hearts as Israel did at Meribah, as they did at Massa in the wilderness. For there your ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw everything I did. For 40 years I was angry with them, and I said, they are a people whose hearts turn away from me. They refuse to do what I tell them. So in my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest. Pretty much, if you don't know, after the Israelites were rescued from Egypt and they went through the Red Sea, they then had to wander the wilderness because they didn't trust in God's plan pretty much for the promised land. And literally, even at Mount Sinai, they turned away. Walking through the wilderness, they turned away. They were like, oh my gosh, God, we have no food. God gave them food. Oh my goodness, we have no water. God gave them water. Like, he provided for them in so many ways, and they were still unfaithful, even up till like the end of their lives. So I don't know. I mean, I do know how that happens because I do the same thing. I'm unfaithful sometimes, and so is everybody else on the planet. If you say you're not, you're lying, because we're all human, and we all, give into temptation from time to time. We all sin from time to time. But the important part is, what is not mentioned here, or what is mentioned here, I guess, is to not do what your ancestors did, to not act like the Israelites did, to not act like their actions do not have consequences, because that's what they did. They were like, okay, we're going to judge God. We're going to say, God, you need to be doing this for us. You need to be giving us food. You need to be giving us water because we're your chosen people. That's not how it works. It's the other way around. God is the special one in our lives. We are not special. Well, we are special, but God is like, God's up here. We're all on equal playing field down here, only human, only mortal. God is a being that surpasses all of our understanding. So we should be reverencing him. We should be giving him the glory as opposed to saying, oh, we deserve all those things because we're God's chosen people. That's entitlement and that's pride. You don't want that. Because God will judge the prideful. God will judge the people that are arrogant. God will judge the people that are entitled. And it is mentioned all throughout the New Testament how God will be coming back one day to judge the world. And if you go to heaven, you will be judged. That's referenced in Revelations and referenced also throughout the New Testament. So it's like, no matter what you do, no matter how you live, you will be judged because you are human and you have sinned. But it's about how you live and how you can avoid, displeasing the Lord. You're not trying to avoid judgment. Judgment will happen. You cannot avoid it. You cannot escape what is going to happen to you, I guess, is in a sense. Everyone's going to be judged. No matter if you're going to heaven or hell, you will be judged for your actions. It's just a matter of, do you trust in the Lord? Do you believe in the Lord? Have you given your life to the Lord? And have you made a change of heart, a change of spirit, a change of being, as opposed to still living in sin, still living in the world, and still living in, you're your own God, or you don't believe in God, kind of thing. So he's advising us to not be like our ancestors in the sense that they only cared about God when judgment came around. They only feared the Lord when there was something to be feared, in a sense. Whenever God wasn't actively punishing them or actively actively punishing them or actively giving them correction, I guess. Correcting them, I should have said, not corrupting them, correcting them. That's the only time they actually cared about God. Otherwise, they would just walk around and then complain. Complain to the one literally guiding them around, giving them food and water. That doesn't make any sense. If you think about it for 5 seconds, you realize how much that God has provided for you. So to complain to him directly, if you're breathing right now, and I know I can't say this for every single person because some people don't feel like this. Some people feel like every day is toil and every day is pain. And for that, I will pray for you because there is hope in Jesus. And I hope that one day people like that do find it. But it is hard when you're living in situations that aren't so very, aren't so very commodious, I guess, is the word, I think. But I have many commodities. I have a room. I have a bed. I have clothes. I have people that make food for me every day at this college. I have teachers that teach me things. I have a skateboard to get around. I have so many other things that, people do not have. Like people in third world countries, they do not have the things that I have. I don't even know what to say about that. But anyway, my point being, right, that life, if you're breathing, if you have life in your body, that is a blessing in and of itself. You may see it as pain and as suffering because you're suffering in the life that you're living. But God giving us a chance to experience everything that we can experience is a blessing in and of itself. And it's an opportunity to praise him and to glorify him. So if I take my life and live it for something else when God gives me a chance to wake up in the morning, then I'm going to be judged for that. And that's not a harsh thing to say. I hope it's not a harsh thing to say. And if it is, then I apologize. But that's just something that is the truth. being alive every day is a blessing, and we should treat it accordingly. Treat it by giving God the glory, right? If I don't acknowledge the person that woke me up every day, what reason do they have to keep waking me up every day? God does it because he loves us and because he's merciful, yeah, but if I'm living every day, wasting my time, living for things that don't matter, and then the day comes where I'm judged, and I'm like, God, you woke me up every day. I said thank you. Just saying thank you is not enough. You got to live it out too. Words are not as powerful as actions, especially when it comes to God. But words and actions both should be pointed towards God if you're living for him. Anyway, another example of God's justice in the Old Testament is the Babylonian justice in Habakkuk. I want to say that's the book name. I might be butchering the name, but I didn't look up a name speech thing. So in chapter 1, verses 2 through 3, the king says, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing?" And God's responses in verses 5 through 11, they pretty much say, where am I at? Okay, hold up. He pretty much says just like, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe. Even if you were told, I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people, and they are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. I'll read the rest in a bit, but even that verse, they are a feared and dreaded people, they are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. So 2 traits of people that are unfaithful and will be judged are people that promote their own honor and people that create laws for themselves. People that are a law to themselves. They live, I'm the king of my own life, I'll do what I want. And that is a one-way ticket to being judged by God. So, if you live your own way, you will be judged by your own standards. That's a bar. Wait. Okay. But that is so true, right? If I live by God's standards, right, I'm going to be judged by God's standards. If I live by my standards, I'm going to be judged by my standards. Matthew 7:1 talks about that as well. Do not judge, for you will be judged by the same standards you judge other people, right? So if I live, the standards I live by are the standards I'm going to be judged by. So if I'm living careless, carefree, life doesn't matter, then God's going to judge me by the same standards I live by. And he's going to be like, yeah, you lived your life great for your standards. But for my standards, you didn't do anything for me. You weren't glorifying me. You weren't giving me glory. You weren't worshiping my name. You weren't spreading the gospel. Those were my standards and you didn't adhere to them. So yes, you were living a good by your terms, but by my terms, they weren't really there. And that's another thing that God is trying to show us through all these examples in the Bible. He wants us to know what are his standards and what are the world's standards and which one we should live by. Leviticus is a whole book of laws that God created for the Israelites to follow his standards. Now, some of those are outdated, right? And there are some Christians that do follow those laws to this day, which if you do or don't, there's no real issue as long as you're following the Lord. But that was a whole list of laws, of standards to follow God, to not be judged. If you didn't follow that, you will be judged, or you needed to put a sacrifice for the altar so that you were not judged. Every time you didn't do those laws or you didn't follow one of the commandments or something to that effect, you would need an animal sacrifice or a calf sacrifice or a certain sacrifice to atone for your sins so that you would not be judged. If you did not do that, you would have received judgment. And every time someone did that, they needed to be set apart from the people so that the other people would not receive judgment from that one person, right? So God is very adamant on how you hold yourself, what standards you hold yourself to, and how to avoid judgment from him. He gives, not avoid judgment from him, but avoid judgment for as many sins as possible, if that makes sense. If you live by a standard, you're going to still sin, obviously, but you're going to be living for Christ as opposed to living in sin. So you won't be judged for your lifestyle. You'll be judged for the actions you commit, yeah, but your life will not be judged. And I think that's a good representation of what I guess how you'll end up in a sense. If you're living your life in sin, right, you're going to be judged by your life. So if your life is judged to be in sin, then God's going to cast you where sin is, in hell. If your life is judged to be lived in Christ, then he's going to bring your life where it belongs, with Christ in heaven, kind of thing. So if you don't look at your life and see that you're living for the Lord, by the Lord's standards, according to the Lord, how he judged the people in the Israelites, how he judged the people in the New Testament, then you are probably on the other end of the spectrum, which is living for the world or living by the world's standards and living by the world's judgment, And I don't know who needs to hear that today, but if you're living by the world's judgment, take some time to read the Bible. Take some time to read Psalms 94. Take some time to read Exodus. Take some time to read Leviticus to know what God's standards are, right? To know a good section to read is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7. Tells you everything that one of Jesus's most famous sermons or passages where he speaks for a long time, but that has so much wisdom and so much knowledge that I try to live by day. Other people try to live by day, and how you should live by day, along with the entire New Testament, entire Old Testament as well. But if you're not living like Christ lived, if you're not living like God wants us to live, then more often than not, or more likely than not, you are probably living for the world. And when you're living for sin, you're going to go to the thing you're worshiping, right? I posted a thing on my story yesterday when you guys are seeing this, but today, Wednesday, about when you worry so much, you are worshiping the thing you're worrying about, as opposed to worshiping God and his power, right? So the thing you're living for, if you're living in sin, you're worshiping whatever you're living for. You're worshiping your gossiping if you really care about drama. You're worshiping money if you really care about riches. You're worshiping your status if you really care about your job. You're worshiping your love life if you really care about your girlfriend or relationship. It's fine to care about all those things. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that caring about those things is the wrong way to go about it. But there's a difference between caring about those things and putting them as the top priority in your life when God should be number one all the time. If I put money at the top of my life, then when I get all those riches, what's going to happen? I'm going to keep getting riches because I'm never going to be satisfied. The only thing that satisfies is God. If I put job status, I'm going to keep trying to rise. And when I get to the quote-unquote top, I'm still going to want more because it doesn't satisfy. God's the only one that satisfies. And God's the only one that can take, the judgment away from us. Jesus died for us. He was judged. He had the weight of the sins of the world on his shoulders as he died on that cross. God judged the sins of the world that moment. And he said, okay, if they go through you, they will have eternal life and they can come live with us in heaven because they will worship you. They will live for you. They will, know you, have a relationship with you, have a relationship with me. But if we don't take that choice, if we don't understand that Jesus died for our sins, if we don't change our lifestyle to live by him, then we're going to be judged for the way we live. It's a simple fact of life. Just like God says in Habakkuk, if they are eventually going to be judged, and I think he says later on, Habakkuk kind of questions him again, and God pretty much responds with, if I can find it, where is it? Okay. Habakkuk, he asks after that, he's like, God, I know you can't stand injustice, so why are you letting these people go around? And I know it's a common thing to see the people of today and look around and say, oh, well, they're living in sin. God's not judging them, so why do I have to have such a hard lifestyle? I've thought that so many times, honestly, and I know there are people out there that have thought the same, that the people that seem to be living in sin, that live in unrighteousness, that live however they want, they're getting so much more out of life. They seem to be so much happier than us who are struggling every day to live by God's standards. And God's response to that, and what I think we should all pay attention to, is in chapter 2. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. He goes on then to talk about how they will never still be satisfied. Woe is to the person that does all these things. Woe pretty much is to the person that lives freely and seems like they're enjoying life, right? And they can seem like they're happy. Don't look too much into it. And don't compare yourself. Comparison is the thief of joy, right? If I compare my life to what's going on in the world around me, obviously the world's going to look more enticing. We were born into the world. We're born into sin. So sin's going to be familiar to us. Sin's going to be wanted by us. But God offers us a better life, a better eternity, just it's not going to be easy, right? It's never meant to be easy. It's not easy to take up your cross every day and follow God, but he offers us that alternative so that we are avoiding judgment. Eternal judgment is what he's trying to get across, that there's an option to go away from eternal judgment. And the people that live freely now, that seem like they're having all the fun, they will receive eternal judgment. And that's what God's trying to protect us from, because he loves us. He's not trying to scare us into following him. He doesn't want us to suffer because he loves us. He doesn't want you to suffer because he loves you. If anyone feels like they're judging you, if you feel like someone's judging you, unless they really are, like, you can tell if someone's judging you. You can tell when someone's judgmental of everything you do, right? But if you feel like every word they say comes off as judgmental, think about it for a second and think if they're actually being judgmental, or if they're saying that because they truly care about you, right? There's a difference between someone that loves me saying, oh yeah, you need to improve on this, this, and that, as opposed to someone that's judging me saying, why are you doing that, bro? You need to do this, this, and that. And their tone will be different, their vibe will be different, what they say will be different. And you can tell, you can pick it up. But God does not want us to suffer. He loves us, so he's trying to correct us. He loved the Israelites, so he's trying to correct them. He loves the Jews and Gentiles, so he's trying to correct them. He loves the Pharisees, so he's trying to correct them. He loves everybody, so he's trying to correct everybody so that they understand who he is, they love him, and they avoid judgment. He doesn't want us to suffer. That's the end. That's the bottom line of God's character. He does not want us to suffer because he loves us infinitely, and he loves us to no end. Literally to no end. His love is unending. It's never failing. Doesn't stop. Doesn't end. Goes on forever. So for an infinite love to possess our hearts, we need to understand who he is and understand that love. And once we understand that, that love will work its way to our hearts, and we'll be like, okay, God doesn't want to see me suffer. Let me avoid judgment by turning to him and living life for him, you know? That was kind of like, I don't know. But one thing I want to say to kind of wrap up with is, what does that mean for us, you know? What does all of this mean in the context of how we live and how we carry ourselves? How do we avoid judgment? How do we live God's righteous way and not fall into temptation? I mean, we'll still fall, but, you know. And I think that the most important way to stay close to Christ in this sense is to remain faithful and trust in God's timing, his judgment, and his wisdom, right? Because if you look around, you're going to see people that don't get judged. You're going to see people that are living freely. You're going to see people that think they're so wise. They think they know everything. They think that everything happens with their timing, right? And if we get misled by that, if we get misled by the lies of the world instead of the truth of God, we are going to fall in temptation as well. And we're going to fall into the same judgment that they will eventually receive. Unbeknownst to them, they will receive eternal judgment. And some people know, or they've been told that they will receive eternal judgment, and they just don't care. Some people do care, and that's, you know, I care. I hope you guys care. If not, talk to me, please, and I want to see where you're coming from, what your mindset is, and we can, you know, have a discussion. Because I think everyone should care about how they're living their life, whether it be for God or for the world. And if you're living for the world, by no means I'm not going to force this on you, but I want to see what your reason is and why you think that, why you live that way. And we can talk about it, we can have a discussion and see, you know, I'll explain to you why I think that way, you can explain to me why you think that way, and we can talk about it. But I think that trusting in God and his timing and his wisdom is key to anything, right? Trusting in God is how you avoid judgment. Trusting in God is how you avoid condemnation. Trusting in God is how you gain wisdom, because you trust God's timing and his knowledge. Trusting in God is adhering to his timing instead of taking things into your own hands and being impatient. Trusting in God is literally the foundation of so many good traits and good habits in life. And I think that in order to not be judged, in order to avoid judgment, in order to trust in God, you have, well, in order to do all these things, you have to trust in God. It has to be at the forefront of your mind at all times. You have to know what you are trusting and who you are trusting in. Another thing is to not take judgment out on yourselves. To not take judgment out on yourselves, on other people, on, you know, anybody. Let God do the judging and you focus on yourself. A good verse for that is Matthew chapter 7, verses 3-5. Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. So that verse is directly attributing to what I just said, you know. Focus on yourself and focus on how you can get right with God before you even think about talking to other people, because obviously someone is not going to listen to you if you're living the same way that they're living. If I see someone that's smoking every day and I say, hey man, you shouldn't smoke, that's bad for you, and I do the same thing, they're not going to take me seriously at all. In fact, they're probably going to laugh at me and clown me for it because I'm saying that while I do the same thing. Or they're just going to brush it off and be like, yeah, whatever, man. And then go back to what they were doing, because I do the same thing, right? If I get my life right, if I live by God, if I don't drink, if I don't smoke, then go to tell other people that, okay, this is just an example. I don't hate on anyone that drinks or smokes. In fact, it's not even that, it is detrimental to you, but that's a topic for another day. Another sin is pornography, I guess. We'll do that. Lust. If I tell someone to not lust and I'm lusting every day, then obviously it's not credible, right? God can tell us to not lust because God is perfect. There's no way to not trust him. And that's another thing. God cannot lie. He has no bad qualities at all whatsoever. So if you're going to trust anybody, I think you should trust God as opposed to trusting me or trusting another person that's telling you something. Because he can't lie. He has no bad qualities. If he tells you to not do something, it's most likely because, one, he doesn't do it at all. And two, it's going to lead to something bad. He warns us about everything because it probably, most likely, definitely leads to something bad. And so, if I live like God, if I'm avoiding certain sins like lust, and if I tell other people why lust is not bad and why they should stay away from it, they're more likely to believe me based on how I carry myself and what standards I hold myself to, and the way that I treat myself in relation to God. And they're going to be like, okay, maybe this guy's worth listening to because he lives his life in this respectable way. And he's not just saying words, his actions represent his words. So I'll listen to him, and maybe what he's saying about judgment is true or not. I'll just hear him out, right? So focusing on yourself, judging yourself first, then you can correct other people. And notice how it says, you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. That's not saying, hi, look at that loser. He has a speck in his eye, man. Oh my gosh. It's not saying that. It's lightly correcting them to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye, to help them see clearly. You're not casting judgment on them saying, oh, you're going to hell. You're saying, this is what God says about your current condition. This is what God says about what that condition leads to. But this is what God says about how you leave that condition, how you escape that condition, and how you become a new person. That's like a gentle correction, as opposed to just saying, you're wrong, I'm right, and that's that. That's not how you're supposed to come off as a Christian at all. And I think every podcast episode I've done is combining into one conglomerate of do's and don'ts as a Christian. I might do an episode on that in a bit, but that's definitely a topic for another day, because there are a lot of don'ts with Christianity, and people don't associate with Christians because they do the things we're not supposed to do, like judge other people. But anyway, James 4:11-12 also says, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against their brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Who are you to judge your neighbor? That's where I'm going to leave it. Think about that for this week. Who are you to judge your neighbor? Who am I that my actions and my thoughts are more righteous than, one, God, and two, the man or woman next to me that is living in the same condition that I am? Who am I to judge them? And in reality, the answer is nobody. I'm not anyone special. I'm another human on this planet, same as you. We're all living through the same thing. It's just about what your focus is on, who you're trying to receive, who you're trying to give the glory. And I think that's where I'll leave it for today. Bottom line, God's just. He can't be unjust. He will judge people. So don't ever get distracted by the fact that, so-and-so's not getting judged. They will see their judgment in due time. What matters is you keeping your faith and you keeping your righteousness by the Lord, so that you can, go around and correct others so they don't receive the same judgment. And that's kind of the goal. We're trying to help others receive God instead of receiving judgment. That's about it. All right. I'm done. Pretty much. I'm not going to talk about next week. Next week will happen. We'll see what happens. I have fall retreat this week, and I'm so excited. Never been to a fall retreat. Never been to a retreat in my life for anything Christian related. So we'll see how this goes. I'm so excited. I'm so hypey. But yeah. Hope to see you guys next week. Maybe we'll have an update for you. Maybe we'll have a guest for you. I don't know. I keep saying that and I don't bring anyone on. But trust, next week will be different. Or at least my intent is for next week to be different. So we'll see. But that's about it. Hope you guys have a great, blessed day. And yeah, see ya.